Hi, I'm David Petersen, the creator of Mouseguard, and welcome to Creator Commentary for the second series of Mouseguard, Winter 1152. This episode will cover Issue 5, or Chapter 5 when it was collected into a hardcover edition. For this issue, I'll be doing the commentary as audio only, but please feel free to follow along in your copy of the story in either issue form or from the hardcover, as I talk about the behind-the-scenes details, art notes, and my headspace, as I go page by page and panel by panel. Also, a fair warning, there will be spoilers if you have not yet read this or the rest of the Mouseguard series. Cover. For this wraparound cover, I needed to fit the showdown between the tiny Liam and the much larger Owl. This being the 11th issue of Mouseguard, I finally felt comfortable doing a cover with no mouse facing forward. The layout of the front portion of the cover was meant to be reminiscent to the page from Fall, where Liam faces the snake in issue 1. I've always been a little ashamed of how the spatial relationships don't quite work here. That to fudge the proportions and positioning to fit the owl in and leave room for the Mouseguard logo for the issue, I just faded the bottom of the owl away, or like he's emerging from under the blanket of snow. But fans do let me know that they love this cover. I even have a fan who got this image as a full chest tattoo, white snow and all. The back portion of the cover shows a bloody Kellinaw. Kellinaw's death was something I'd planned since the start of the Winter series, and since it is ultimately in this issue that he passes, it only felt right to have him featured here. But for the first-time reader, they might not know if the old fur is dead or just seriously wounded. A tension I didn't mind. Inside front cover. The opening bring the reader up to speed text is pretty much a recap of what's happened already, but I did embellish that Sadie and Kenzie had wandered until sleep took them. I think to help make the first scene of this issue feel less that they'd given up and more that exhaustion overcame them. I've said this in past commentaries, but I'm still pretty sure I drew all of the inside front cover spot illustrations at once at the start of the series as a warm-up for drawing winter scenes, and then just picked the best one to fit each issue as I went. The poem A Mouse's Eulogy for Life is once again attributed to Royben the Scribe, a character introduced through a fan contest and won by Laurie Johnson. Its obvious message about not giving up was placed here in issue 5 because I tend to use the penultimate issues of a series to play in some of the darkest bits. Though I think for Winter, the previous issue 4 may be a bit more bleak than this one. Page 1, Panel 1. An establishing shot of the Weasel dining room we saw in the last issue, but instead of reusing the old panel, I redrew it, trying to make everything a little more visible this go-around, while still trying to make it look dark. The all in shadow version worked in the context of the panels around it before, but here as an establishing shot, I needed more instant clarity for the reader. Panel 2. Panel 2 is immediately to the right of Panel 1, at the top of the page. I realize now this is a little tricky to follow for non-comic readers who don't know if they should read the panel in the lower left as Panel 2. I needed a beat showing Kenzie and Sadie asleep, and with all of my work in the past issues to be subtle about their budding romance, this snuggle nap was the payoff visual. I liked using the bottom of the octagonal chairs as their little sleep shelter to help drive home the scale issue. They are strangers in a strange land. Panel 3. I never built a model of this room. In the panels from issue 4, I did cobble together a few photo references, but for this issue, I drew the room from scratch each time. Even though it's lighter than the panels in the previous issue, I was still able to hide a lot of perspective crimes in the large black shadows. The table is in the extreme foreground to help the reader understand where in context this doorway is in relation to the panels they've already seen. Without it, we don't even know if this place is in the same room as the previous panels. I'm still rather proud of how the torchlight coming down the corridor works as a storytelling device in this panel. Panel 4. Something about the light must wake Kenzie, or whatever footsteps sound like in that place. I tried to show a subtle warm glow on Kenzie and the top of Sadie's head, showing the torchlight close to them. Panel 5. Other than the difficulty of fitting everything in, I'm not sure why I opted to leave a page turn for Saxon's real appearance, giving his feet, tail, torn cloak, and bone torch the only visuals of him here. I may have done it also to try new things. I was aware that as a storyteller, I could use some work in varying my camera angles and panel beats, so dragging this reveal onto another page gave me a chance to try something with more depth of focus. Page 2. The outline for page 1 and this page says, Saxon walks out of hell to Kenzie and Sadie, parentheses, speech. Panel 1. Saxon starts his snit. I never wanted Saxon's jealousy to be an indication that he has feelings for Kenzie other than brotherly ones, something that fans have speculated about. But that he's upset here that he's been left out, and that his time with Kenzie as a brother may be reduced if Sadie and Kenzie have become a couple. Panel 2. This panel is pulled back a bit and looking down on the characters partly to mix up the visuals, but also to fit in all those word balloons. To help me with the lighting, I filled in the tick marks on the ground up to a radius around Saxon's torch. It gave me something to go with when coloring for pushing the lighting even more with value and hue. Kenzie is only angry enough at Saxon to push blame onto the impulsive mouse for 2 sentences, and then immediately follows up with concern about where Saxon was. And that's something Saxon would rather not talk about, and quickly snipes back at his friend. Panel 3. While Kenzie's face looks angry, he's really trying to end a squabble rather than fuel one. The mouse Kenzie is referring to when he mentions Saxon following his heart is Gwendolyn, and I may have a story in my head about Saxon seeing Gwendolyn when he joined the Guard and instantly falling in love with her. And also, that shuts Saxon up. Panel 4. Kenzie takes Saxon's statement as Saxon's version of an apology, but stops short. He's meant to be bowing to his red-cloaked friend when he catches a glimpse of something. Panel 5. Lucas's clasp and sword. The word balloons here aren't clear, but Kenzie is meant to be saying, is that, and Saxon saying, yes, but it still works even if you think Kenzie said both. Panel 6. The word that is in bold because Kenzie knows what that sword means, with Lucas being Saxon's beloved mentor, but I added meaning to this line with the Free Comic Book Day story that was later collected in Baldwin the Brave and Other Tales called The Wise Weaver, where we see that it was Kenzie's father who smithed that sword as a gift for Lucas. Kenzie wants Saxon, who has a habit of being careless and hard on his blades, to treat that sword with respect. Page 3, Panel 1. Sadie could be seen looking at these plates on the last page in Panel 3, and here she explains that she thinks the food scraps are newer than when the Weasels lost the war and abandoned Darkheather. I had a whole subplot planned about a weasel or a faction of weasels still in Darkheather that I was setting up here, and even more firmly in the epilogue, but I abandoned it, and now I only remember that I was going to do that, not why or how, or any other details about weasels in Darkheather again. Perhaps I'll thread it back in the future volume somehow, just to tie up the threads. Saxon, angry in general, is now a bit salty towards Sadie, jealous in a non-romantic way. I've recently described this as a character study in What Happens When Saxon Becomes the Third Wheel. Panel 2. I'd planned for this party to eventually come to the sound of running water when in Darkheather to help them out. But as I hadn't moved them out of the room where Kenzie and Sadie spent the night, I decided to word Kenzie's dialogue just so as a way to explain away that it was right beside them all along. And it does make sense for a water source to be so close to where the weasels dined. Panel 3. I built a model of this room out of cardboard with printed details on paper glued onto each wall's surface, and a tile pattern glued to the angled roof sections. The floor waterways and fountain bowl were influenced by the Court of Lions in the Moorish architecture of the Alhambra in Spain. To make the floor sections more interesting, I found a maze-like pattern to overlay like a tile texture. Sure, the waterfall would overflow that basin, unless it had a large drain in the bottom that most of the water continued to pass through, leaving only the slightly restricted water to flow from those spouts into the floor paths. Page 4, Panel 1. Kenzie's line from the previous page and his dialogue here are a little world/character building that Saxon is one of the few, I feel like I mentioned it being 3 somewhere, mice who ever entered Darkheather and came out alive. And it's not something Saxon wants to talk about. I tried to imply his speech being a whisper, both by lowering the point size of the font, but also by darkening the word balloon. Panel 2. After Sadie explores the stairway in Panel 1, she arrives at the top of the waterfall wall and discovers the source of the flow of water. Now, I did worry about what I was implying about the depth they would need to be underground for this water to have not frozen. especially when they are able to get out at the end of the issue, but perhaps we can all write this off due to the rate of flow, or just accept that if mice walk and talk in this comic, perhaps not all water freezes as it would in the real world. Panel 3. The angle of this panel was chosen to include a shot of the weasel scale water bucket. I'd shown it in the big establishing shot on the last page, and in panel 1 on this page, but I'd want it to be clear as an available object in a coming scene. Panel 4. While Kenzie is the leader and usually makes the plans, I wanted to give Sadie this moment because it falls into her line of expertise. She knows how to paddle boats in current, as we saw in fall. I also made sure to include her boat making and usage as part of her backstory in the role-playing game and in the Free Comic Book Day story Thane and Ilsa. Saxon's dialogue helps transition the reader to page 5, Owl Fight. For the next 8 pages, 1/3 of an issue, the issue outline only said Owl Fight. In preparing for this commentary, I found a sketchbook where I was working out key moments in this sequence and listing the beats. There were several variations where a bit lasted longer or excessive actions were noted and then scribbled out. Sometimes I drew arrows to rearrange some of those beats. And in the end, we have these 8 pages. Panel 1. We finally return to this moment of Kellenaw charging the owl, something I left off with on page 5 of the last issue. And this panel is just to reestablish the scene and return to that exact moment. Panel 2. I remember it being tricky to find reference of the bottom or the soles of an owl's feet. I also wanted to be careful with how much or how red the blood was, especially since I couldn't really pull punches in this battle. Panel 3. I pulled back the camera to fit everyone in. We needed to see the result of Kellenaw's axe hit in panel 2, and I wanted to have Liam in the panel if Kellenaw was talking to him. It's also one of those panels that helps remind the reader of scale. Panel 4. I could have included this dialogue in panel 3, but I decided to give it its own space with a tighter close-up on Kellenaw as he delivers part of his main mentoring message tagline. Page 6, panel 1. I took some liberty here. How did the owl get into this position? Did it fall over because its foot was wounded? Was there a strike between the last panel on page 5 and here? No, I just thought this looked cool, especially Kellenaw's super jump pose. Panel 2. I let some moments slip by again. We never see that strike in panel 1, partly because I wanted to avoid showing wound contact moments with the axe for fear of it being too gory, but also to try to speed up the fight choreography here and there. But we do see the slash where the axe connected. Panel 3. Kellenaw wasn't so lucky with a foot strike this time, and he's ended up in the owl's clutches. There were a lot of panels like this one where I had to decide how much or how little of the owl to show so that I could still feature the mice, but not so much that the owl can't be read. The feather wing tap knocking Liam away almost seems like the owl isn't out to kill the red fur, only Kellenaw. I'm not sure if that was my intent back when I wrote and drew this, but reviewing it now, that's kind of how it reads to me. Page 7, panels 1 through 6. This 9-panel grid was meant to be a monotonous set of moments with split seconds between each, none of them getting more page real estate than the next. Panels 7 through 9. I do think these moments could have been given a bit more room to breathe, though, but it would have spoiled that 9-panel grid system and the rhythm I wanted for the part with Kellenaw getting stomped over and over. Page 8. Like the moments in Watchmen where it goes from a claustrophobic 9-panel grid into full open pages at certain moments for impact, I wanted to have these action scenes get that space to move. Open space in the sky and free of all word balloons. Panel 1. I tried to get the snow to drive more in this sequence since the owl is flying into it. This first panel shows how precarious Liam's position is. Panel 2. And, as he moves up the owl, tightening in on him, trying to get that squinty-eyed, fur-blown look you might have if you were climbing up the back of a flying owl in a snowstorm. I played with his fur texture and cloak position here more than I'd done in the past to get that movement across. Panel 3. This panel is very much like panel 1, except the angle's a bit different, and it's meant to show how Liam has climbed and dragged himself up to the head of the owl in these past few panels. I put the sword pointing up to make it read very clearly so the reader could anticipate page 9. This page is a 180-degree rotation of the previous page's layout. Panel 1. They could anticipate this moment of Liam plunging that sword into the neck of the owl. I think I drew the sketch of Liam and the owl in a way where the whole owl was visible. But after scanning the pencil drawing into a page template in Photoshop, I opted to enlarge the scene and crop off the owl a bit so we could focus on that moment and that wound. Panel 2. And besides, I gave the owl a reaction shot here, and I planted the seeds of Liam being thrown off balance a bit. Panel 3. To try to figure out what an owl might look like tumbling out of the sky, I found several photos of owls flying overhead of the photographer and rotated them around until I found one that felt like it was not in control of a flight path, with gravity dictating part of it. Page 10, Panel 1. This was the first time I've ever tried this kind of panel, an animation-style moment where we see the same figure going through a range of motion in a single panel. It took some work in the coloring stage for it to work properly, and I was worried until I was almost done with the colors that the effect was reading properly. But I'm still pretty proud of how this turned out in the end. Panels 2 through 4. I needed to separate Liam and the owl for at least part of the fight, and having him tumble off the owl mid-crash felt right. The feather grab and pluck was a red herring moment I wanted to put in, both that perhaps Liam would be able to hold on to the owl and that the feather could be his parachute to slow his descent. Both untrue. Page 11. This page is a 180-degree rotation of the same panel layout as the previous page. Panels 1 through 3. I think I was going to have Liam fall straight into the snow originally, but I added this moment in. I think both for more peril and to slow him down a bit, though he'd snap his neck if we were worrying about real physics. Oh well. Mice that walk and talk, non-freezing shallow water, and stronger than practical mouse necks. It's a comic. I think I also contemplated Liam slipping out of his cloak here to make him more in trouble. No cloak to protect him in the cold. But I didn't like the visuals of that. I wanted his costume on him in the coming scenes. Panel 4. I carefully placed Liam plopping into the snow to line up with the panel gutters above him, to not only avoid tangents, but also so that the white vertical space could almost serve as a visual plummet line. Page 12, panels 1 and 2. The owl made it to ground after Liam, but given the direction it's facing, it's safe to assume it glided a bit and even circled around towards Liam's position. I purposely buried the owl's face as well as pulled back far enough in panel 2 so that the reader is unsure of who survived this encounter, if anyone did at all. Page 13. This page is the same panel layout as the previous page. Panel 1. Hopefully the visual inclusion of the weasel scale water bucket in the previous pages made this choice of improvised boat something that the reader at least understood, if not also anticipated. Sadie is safely in the bucket, and Kenzie has the tilt working to support him on the taller handle plank, but Saxon has to be lashed to the other side as he lights and guides the way. For all of these scenes, I used a brush to ink the water. I usually only ink Mouseguard pages with a pen. Back in the days of working on Winter, I was still using Uniball Vision office pens. But in some instances where I needed a specific line type, I switched to a brush with a bottle of ink. The ripples in the water and the overall coverage of black are easier with a brush for me. Panel 2. The columns they pass are meant to resemble octopuses, which will become clearer in a few pages. I'd seen a documentary show about the upside-down Medusa heads under the columns in a Turkish cistern. The show's host put forward the idea that the Christian builders of that era were making a statement about their faith by symbolically drowning the old pagan gods, by placing the heads of the statues underwater. I thought I could use a bit of that idea for these columns, but had to show enough of the octopus's eye bulge to make it visually make sense. Page 14, panel 1. Saxon is being a jerk again, and I wanted it to be clear that he was. That it wasn't a cool trait of his, and to showcase his imperfections. After Fall came out, I heard a lot of fans enjoying Saxon as their favorite character, but sometimes touting his faults in that book almost like they were virtues. I wanted to showcase some of his imperfections in Winter. As a visual reference to help me plan angles for the bucket boat scenes, I used an old Christmas tin, about this shape, that has Santa's face painted on the side. Panel 2. A reveal that Lucas's sword pommel has a compass inside. That's handy. It was something I included in my earliest sketch of his sword design from Winter number 4. The inscription reads, "Wander where you will, the grove of oaks stands no taller than your bravery." The sword was gifted to Lucas by the town of Oak Grove after years of solid and appreciated service as a guard mouse who patrolled their area of the territories. Panel 3. Oh, I forgot to mention, Sadie is using a weasel spoon, probably a larger serving spoon, as a paddle. Page 15. This page's layout is a mirror of the previous pages. Panel 1. I'm having Sadie ask this question on behalf of the reader, and in some ways on behalf of me. I started to realize how convenient the path was for our mice, and wanted to address that. Panel 2. Kenzie's answer gives just enough doubt over the weasels having any knowledge of access this far under the territories. The weasels did not carve these columns. Not that I have a for sure answer about who did, but I don't think it was the weasels. I was influenced by the scene in Wind in the Willows when Badger gives Mole a tour of his home and they come upon columns and architectural relics that Badger admits were not made by his kind. To visually explore how the geometry of the ends of the tentacles interacted, I made a clay version of one of these octopus column tops that was mounted upside down. I did it on a sheet of Bristol board marked out with evenly spaced lines going out in the 8 directions. Panel 3. Finding Abigail's floating dead body is something that sounds gruesome when you write it or say it aloud, but I tried my best in this upcoming sequence to make sure that the visual tone matched what I was already doing with Mouseguard. Page 16, Panel 1. I always wanted there to be something that mouse eyes can distinguish between a common mouse garment and a guard's cloak. It's not practical in any way, that there is some weave or characteristic that would be so obvious, but I prefer it to something like an insignia or a symbol mark as a guard mouse. Panels 2 and 3. The reaction shots of Kenzie and Sadie are part of a Hitchcock trick to show the reaction of the mice viewing the horrific thing rather than showing the horrific thing. However, it didn't work so well here. I think I did a better job of this trick in the Black Axe book. Not only do the mice not have quite enough facial emotion to do the work that I'm asking of the trick, but, Panel 4, then I go and show the corpse anyhow. I think I wanted to just show the arrows mainly, with the full body of Abigail's body so tightly cropped you couldn't make it out, but I realized that it might not be clear to the reader if I didn't show her full body at least once. Page 17. This page's layout is almost a mirror of the previous pages. Panels 1 and 2. The broken cistern. In my original outline, I'd planned on the mice needing to break into it to get inside, but having it already broken helped in many ways. It expedited the scene, it gave a logical way that Abigail's corpse was floating downstream, and it made sure her poison was so diluted that it had no effect. I included a small waterfall streaming down some rock in the background to help explain that this water is flowing and that the source is fresh and not stagnant. For visual aids, I looked at photos of stone silos and towers. Panel 3. The LH is for Lock Haven, but the symbol is the mark of the Haven Guild, something I explore more of and their clandestine origins and roles in the Black Axe book. So even though they say it's the mark of a Lockhaven Mason, it appears Haven Guild stonemasons built this cistern in 977. If you added a 1 to the front of this date, you'd have my birth year. Page 18, Panel 1. I think I tried finding 2 reference photos that I could blend to show the inside and exterior of this cistern in perspective, and may have even toyed with making a quick paper model. But ultimately, I just sketched out the rough pencils for this from scratch. I do wish I'd made the walls seem thicker, though. The compositional trick was in getting the angle and the crack opening so that we could see the mice in the bucket, and we could see the opening at the top leading into Lockhaven. Panel 2. This mouse was seen on the original RPG cover as a water carrier. When I needed a water carrier for this story, I just nabbed his design from the rulebook's diverse cast of types of mice you could play portrayed on the cover. His expression was something I tried to get to read as being shocked and skeptical to hear the hello from the well. Panel 3. I used a photo taken looking down a tiled sewer shaft to help with the concentric rings of brickwork in perspective. Page 19. This page's layout is a 90-degree rotation of the previous pages. Panel 1. 3 of our party have arrived back at Lockhaven. The M''lady was the way I've used for the guard mice to refer to Gwendolyn for a proper verbal address. I checked back and I did use it consistently in fall, and it looks like I did in winter too. It's something I've got to remember for the future volumes. Panel 2. The guard mice are melting icicles for fresh water since they still were under the impression the well was poisoned. Some readers have misread them as frozen carrots because of the orange glow reflecting off of them from the lit ovens. Panel 3. Gwendolyn comforts Saxon. I was hoping that this would get readers thinking Gwendolyn may be the mouse Saxon loves that has been mentioned not by name a few times while the mice were in Darkheather. And while my plan was for Saxon and Rand to have an antagonistic relationship, like when Saxon asked Kenzie if Rand had ever killed a snake in fall, Rand was Saxon's patrol partner for years, and they have a deeper history that I have planned. Saxon cares about the yellow-cloaked defender in the same brotherly way he cares for Kenzie. Page 20, Panel 1. I chose a top-down camera angle to mix things up a bit and to make room for all the dialogue. I wish I'd tightened in a bit more, though, or made the space more interesting. I did have a model of Lockhaven's larder, but the ceiling is glued on and integral to the structure, so I can't use it to help me frame this angle or shot. Sadie mentions it's been 4 nightfalls since the party split. That's all the time that this story has taken place in? Well, in some ways that seems short, but when you consider the sleep time I showed for Liam and Kellanagh, it also seems long. Panel 2. Here I go a bit tighter to deliver the impact of Liam and Kellanagh not having returned. As the pair had the easier path to travel, or at least more direct and obvious for a route, it's supposed to be troubling that the trio made it back first. I was trying to get some of the tension of the moment when the hobbits get to the prancing pony and Gandalf has not arrived or been seen in months. Page 21. This page is the same panel layout as the previous pages. Panel 1. Continuing Gwendolyn's dialogue over the owl waking up was meant to give this scene more impact. And while the owl is obviously still alive, I still have not visually made it clear that either mouse is. Panel 2. But I don't make the reader wait long to learn that Liam is alive. And the stippling is meant to be the owl's shadow looming over Liam. Page 22, panels 1 through 3. But after a page turn, we see Kellanagh is alive too. I wanted to give this moment as many panels as I could to showcase the deliberate effort and pain Kellanagh is suffering as he rises again. As the ballad of the Ivory Lass goes, battered and bruised, I stood to my paws, raising what little I owned. Panels 4 and 5. Owls can rotate their heads up to 270 degrees, and I thought a quick head snap so that the owl could see Kellanagh behind it would be a good effect. Both Kellanagh and the owl say again, this ends in death. Page 23. This page's layout is almost a mirror of the previous pages. Panel 1. The outline simply reads, Kellanagh slain. The asterisk-like mark as a symbol for death is one that I picked up from the first issue of Eastman and Laird's TMNT, when Shredder dies. Panel 2. Liam's cry of no is an homage to Luke watching Obi-Wan be struck down by Darth Vader in A New Hope. His mentor is gone sooner than he'd want. He's not ready, and he's alone, and it all seems avoidable and senseless to Liam. I know that's a lot of feeling to jam into 2 beady little eyes and a no, but that's what I was thinking of for him. Panel 3. And the last panel of the issue was the closest moment we have to the moment shown on the cover. Liam is ready to slay the owl as Kellanagh lies dead with the axe having no wielder. All set up for the last issue. Pin-up by Sean Wong. Sean and I met at a Wizard World Philly convention when Fall was coming out. Mark Smiley introduced us. I became an instant fan of Sean and his book, Runners, a sci-fi romp with alien smugglers. And somewhere in our post-convention email exchanges, we decided to do a pin-up exchange. I can find the emails leading up to the idea of a pinup, but not any emails where we talk about the specifics. I'm sure I must have given Sean some info and outline about the issue his pinup would be included in, and probably visuals for the first several issues, if not some from this issue too. But the piece turned out great, no matter what info was exchanged prior to it being drawn. And that's the 5th issue of Mouse Guard Winter 1152. It has been collected in hardcover, published by Archaea. If you've enjoyed this commentary, please leave your comments in the section below, let me know what I didn't answer for you for this issue, and subscribe for updates when I add more Mouse Guard commentary. Thank you for listening.